Why do you want them to listen to your podcast?
So that when they think about starting a business, they've got the content that is pointing them in the right direction.
That is such a valuable piece of advice there.
The change in mindset makes a massive difference.
Welcome to Aussie Lawn Stars.
Welcome to Aussie Lawn Stars. Peter Lynch, how you doing?
Yeah, all right, Gary. Thanks for invitation to join you.
I've been looking forward to doing this one for a while. Now, people listening in, Peter Lynch is a family friend. I've known Peter for quite a few years, and my wife has known Peter and his wife Jo for many more years. Peter, I wanted to get you in for an interview because your field of expertise is very interesting for anybody thinking about starting business. And even though my podcast is aimed at lawn care and gardening, business skills, and particularly the business skills you have in abundance, are really interesting and things that people need to have front of mind when they're looking at starting a business or if they're struggling with why their business is not running well.
Yep.
So, yeah, thought I'd start by taking a bit of a dive into your background, the reason why you have some skills.
Yep. Yeah, that's probably a fair move too. Look, many moons ago, when I left school, I joined the banking industry, worked for, back then, what was the old National Bank and turned into the NBA.
Oh, yeah.
Worked with them for 18 odd years. Went out on my own. We had one business that we did between Joe and I and a couple of friends. So that started us off, but it wasn't long after that I started doing study. So I did my Bachelor of Accounting and Information Systems, which of course helps. But having the 18 years of bank experience, certainly you see a lot. I did everything from home loans through to commercial loans. And that gives you a heck of a lot of experience. But probably more recently, Gary, you may remember, I ended up buying I was working for a church organisation for 15 plus years and then left that and ended up buying my own Jim's Test and Tag franchise.
Yeah.
I'm sure many of your listeners are, you may even have some that are Jim's mowing. But it's all worked on the same principles and did that for 10 years. Just recently sold out and now working as a business manager in a school, which keeps me very busy.
Yep. Yeah, I've interviewed a few people that have a banking background similar to you, where they've been doing a multitude of things in banking and that's led them into running their own business at some stage.
Yep.
That's interesting. You've done the same thing. You've had a couple of goes running your own business as well as all of the background you have in accounting and business studies.
Yep, that's right. Yeah. So I did my Bachelor of Accounting through Central Queensland Uni. That was great, but I didn't do it on campus. I did it externally, so I did it the hard way. But still really, really good, and I did enjoy the course. And I think it did set me up well, particularly having past experience with banking, talking to clients from many different walks of life, and then what their experiences were, particularly getting into a new business. So that also helped a lot.
So you would have seen a bunch of people come through putting numbers in front of you and claiming that they have a good business model. And I'm guessing some things would have stood out to you as things that were clear red flags.
Oh, look, and even come back before that, the clear red flags in anybody is if they come into a business and they think, oh, yeah, I know how to run this, but they haven't sat down and actually thought about it. And there are very good models out there and even things through the internet particularly for doing a business plan. So business plans can be anything from, well, okay, I want to get into it. These are my reasons. This is what I want to get out of it. What experience do I have to put into it? What money do I have to put into it? Very importantly. But a business plan can also be, okay, I want to reach a certain demographic of people. where am I going to find those people? So they're all involved in your business plan. So really, really important document.
Yeah, for sure. Now, a couple of things I think that are important in a business plan is what are the key things that will help a business be a success. So
Absolutely.
obviously coming in with skills that are going to benefit the business are one thing, but also having a good understanding of what means success for any given business. And most of that's going to hinge on financial measures, but a lot
Yep.
of it will also hinge on why you're in business instead of being an employee. So if you're
Oh,
running a
correct.
business, you want some flexibility or you want to make more money than you can when you're an employee. But yeah, a bunch of factors there
So
that help.
I suppose the key thing there too is why are you going into a business for yourself? I think that's a really important one that any new business owner, it doesn't matter what they're getting into, they
Yeah,
need to ask yourself, why are you actually doing this?
of course.
So, sometimes it'll be, I just wanted to give myself a job. Well, really, is that what you should be in there for? Unless you've got some determination to do it, thinking you're buying a job, that never works.
For lawn care and gardening, that is a large part of the industry. People are leaving a job and buying a job. And I think in a service industry where you're relying on customers that keep you on the books, so you're doing repeat work fortnightly or weekly or monthly or whatever it might be, it's fairly easy to find enough work in a service industry like this. But without knowing some of the other details, the financial details behind that, you can be busy without making money.
Oh, absolutely. And that's the big thing. Knowing how you're going to actually earn that dollar. Where are your customers coming from? What sort of experience are you getting for yourself on how to deal with customers?
Yeah.
Um, you if you can't close a sale, for example, somebody you're out, let's say, quoting for a job, but you can't ask the client to, well, are you happy with this? Would you like me to proceed? Unless you can actually close the sale, that's a really important skill to be able to have too. A lot of people come in and what do you think? Oh, yeah, it's really good. I'll call back in a week or so and see if you're happy to go with it.
Yeah.
There's all that sort of stuff that people don't think about when they're actually trying to work for themselves.
That often leads to people undervaluing their own service when they are
Correct.
unsure about closing and how
Yep.
to come across confident when they are doing that.
Yeah, that's not something. Not everyone is born to be a salesperson either.
No.
In a lot of cases, you just have to be yourself, but you need to be able to be prepared to talk. So, and talk nicely, of course.
Yeah. And because people come into lawn care and gardening with an approach that they're buying themselves a job a lot of the time, they often come without any business skills and they tend
Yep.
to focus on the technical aspect of I can make long grass short. I know something about your garden. I'm going to make it better than what it was before I started. And they focus solely on the technical aspect
The
of the
technical
service they're
aspects of
providing.
it. Yeah, and that's another aspect that really where a business plan was really, really helpful because it helps you to understand what are your costs as you're coming into your business. So let's take, for example, lawn care.
Yeah.
So what do you need? You need obviously your vehicle, you need your trailer, your mowers, whether it be push or ride on. Obviously, there's all the other gardening tools. So you need to have an idea of what that's going to cost you. How are you going to finance that? There's all of that that can be exposed when you're doing your business plan.
Yeah, for sure. I guess this brings us back to the fact what you mentioned before. You bought a Jim's Test and Tag franchise.
Yep,
When people look at buying a business or starting a business from scratch, if you're buying an existing business, often you get the advantage that there is already the semblance of a business plan, even if the paperwork doesn't exist. You can
yep.
see a model of what somebody else has been doing, or if it's a franchise where you're buying into a franchise, then somebody's holding your hand and helping you work out those steps, even if you don't know you need them.
Yeah, and I suppose that was one of the good things I liked. I had a look at a lot of businesses from when I stopped working to actually starting in the business. So we looked for quite a long time. We came across the Jim's Test and Tag, and it was one very thankfully that was in my local area. But as you say, Gary, it was a ready business. It had clients, quite a number of clients that were in it.
Yeah.
And that is really handy, particularly when you're starting in a business, because you've got money potentially coming in.
Yep.
But before you can even get to that, like one of the big things, particularly with the gyms group, they give you a business plan template,
Yep.
which is what you work through. So all of that, you've got to do acceptance workshops, then you go through training. So that was one of the good things I liked about the gyms group, in the sense that they give you a lot of skills to help you succeed.
Yeah.
But as you rightly say, you've got a franchisor, so a mentor. So
Yeah.
even if you're going out on your own, somebody you can talk to, bounce off, whether it be your accountant, a really good friend, somebody you know who might be already in the business.
Yeah.
That can be really, really helpful, particularly when you're starting out. One of
Yeah.
the big things that really came out when I was coming in was being working as an accountant and then coming into any sort of business. You've got to make sure that you have available cash up your sleeve. Even if I was coming into, like I came into the business as I did, yes, you have to set up your schedules, how you're going to approach people, getting the clients on board, working with them, setting up appointments, going out and doing the work, obviously getting paid, which is a really big one, but making sure you had enough cash up your sleeve when you start, because you've got to feed yourself as you're going.
Yes.
Excuse me a minute.
That's all right. So, yeah, that's one of the things that you and I have discussed before. I've come to you when I've been trying to work out whether I should stay in business or whether I should go and find a job somewhere else, and asked you a couple of questions. And I was like, what's one of the key things that is worthwhile to monitor from a accounting, bookkeeping perspective? And you said cash flow is the main indicator of success in a business.
Oh, absolutely. Look, at the end of the day, and this, again, another aspect of your business plan. A business plan, so they'll say to you, well, what do you think your income is going to be? What are your known expenses? So as you are starting, obviously you've got to go out and do the job. You've got to do it well. Your client's going to be happy. They're going to pay you the terms in which they pay you. So whether it's on the spot, some clients, particularly in the lawn mowing business, you'll pretty well be cash or FPOS straight up front.
Yep.
But there might be some of your bigger jobs, particularly if you're doing a landscaping job or something that you quote for, it might be, okay, they got 14 days. So making sure that you're getting the money in, and are you covering your costs when you do the job? That is obviously a really big one.
Yeah, so collecting payment is one of the things that helps with cash flow, obviously. And I think
Absolutely.
everyone wants to collect payment, but when it comes time to send an invoice rather than just having cash put in your hand, people will delay sending an invoice, or they will not follow up with an invoice that hasn't
Bad
been paid.
move. Absolutely. Yeah, you're right. And that's absolutely paramount. One of the best practices that when I got to the end of the day, I always sat down, did any reports, did any follow up that you had to do, but more importantly, get that invoice done, send it to the client.
Yeah.
Even after that, it doesn't hurt sometimes, even like, for example, the next day or 2 days later, give the client a ring and just make sure they've got your invoice.
Yep.
Because then, you're going to find out quick enough if there are any issues that you need to resolve. But just making sure they've got it, sometimes that can be, it's just adding that personal approach to how you're doing business.
Yeah. Now, using an accounting package like Xero, I use Xero,
Yep.
but there's plenty of options out there. if you invoice from that accounting package, you can go back in and it will tell you if the customer has received the email.
Absolutely. Yeah. And most of the accounting packages now, you can almost do it while you're at the end of the job.
For sure.
We've all got these things.
Yep.
So you can actually do your invoice, send it to your client, say to your client, hey, look, I've just sent that to you. Would you like to pay that now? But the key thing is in any business, cash is king.
Yeah.
So, and then of course, knowing how many jobs in a day you can do. If it's a big one, obviously it might take a day or two, but if it's a little one, how many jobs can you get in a day?
Yeah.
And then obviously scheduling them in such a way that it's easy to get around them too. That's always important.
Yeah, for sure. And I've different businesses recently about CRMs, so talking about customer relationship software. And most of those will offer scheduling as well as invoicing, which allows you
Yep.
to have a closer relationship with the customer and the invoice process to make sure that they're happy, the job's completed, you're getting paid on time, and
Yep.
and scheduling repeat services.
Absolutely. And booking them in, even if you're with the client, book them in for the next available visit.
Yeah.
So that you've got it in your calendar. You know what's coming up. You know roughly what the job's going to be. That's all very important.
I think with lawn mowing and gardening, it's important to have clear expectations with the customer about the repeat maintenance service intervals.
Yep.
So that there's no question about that. A lot of times, if you get a dry spell through summer or coming out of autumn into winter, the customer will wait till they see you and be like, "It doesn't need doing, go away." So if you can send them a text
That's
message a
always the
day
hard
before,
part, isn't it?
if you send them a text message a day before, then you get the chance to have that discussion before you actually waste your time driving there. Or if you
Yep.
set an expectation that there's this many services per year, disregard any issues around drought or winter. This is the number of services and the service intervals that we work around for this business model.
Yeah, and that is an important aspect because obviously the best client is the one that wants to have your back. And also another very important thing is, look, is there anybody else that you might know that can we contact them for if somebody might be wanting your services? Because word of mouth is absolute power when it comes to running your business and building your business too.
In a repeat service industry like this, word of mouth can make or break a business. And there's many other methods of marketing, but it is a really powerful method of marketing when you're seeing a customer every week or two.
Yeah, that's absolutely key. I can remember over the years, and interestingly, you'll get some clients when you start. Like I started off with a book of about 80 odd clients in the business. That client book changed a lot over the 10 years. You get some that'll drop off, you get new ones that'll come in. Whether you get them from leads, if you're in a franchise scenario, you can get leads for new work, or again, you can get referrals, which is a great way to be able to build that business.
Yeah, for sure. So, touching on a couple of other cash flow issues, when you're analysing the viability of your business, whether it's buying in or whether it's you're existing and you're wanting to make sure that you know where you're up to, two factors that I think go hand in hand. One of them is, first off, looking at the expense ratios so that you can go, okay, if I need an income from this business, I need to take wages and profit to form my own personal income. So if my aim for an income is $100,000 and I know my expenses are up around 50%, then I need a business turnover of $200,000.
150, yeah.
Yeah. So that's one factor. Then the other factor there is to go, okay, if I've got a expense ratio to work around and I know that I'm fairly good with getting my invoices out and getting money back in the bank, are there expenses that come in waves. So, say for insurance that's due annually or other things that might be due at the end of the month, then can I smooth those expenses out to make the cash flow more even throughout the whole year?
Yeah, and that is actually a really important point, Gary. You're absolutely right. I suppose this is where it becomes really, really important to have a good relationship either with or both with your accountant, if you have one. But more importantly, particularly if you've got a banker, so for example, you might have bought it, let's take a franchise as an example.
Yep.
Sometimes just sitting down and having that discussion with a banker, a broker, can be absolutely critical in terms of ensuring the success of your business over the long term. So, for example, if you're buying into a business, and one key thing that was always stressed to me, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, is making sure you have enough cash. Say, for example, as if your income dried up, and lawn mowing is a classic example, income dries up for 2-3 months, or at least might halve in that time frame.
Yes.
How do you still keep that? How do you make sure that you've still got enough cash in the bank to pay those costs as they come through?
Yeah.
So one thing that was always said to me is make sure when you start that you have it between 3 to 6 months of available cash to cover for that time frame. So
Yeah.
that's everything: your household bills, your business expenses, and it might be loan repayments on your business. You've got insurance bills, fuel, there's all of that. How do you fund all that? And that's where a very good discussion with your banker or broker or accountant for that matter, in terms of how that is structured, is absolutely critical up front.
One of the things I've found really important there for the lawn care industry, because it's seasonal, is to look at several figures that you can then break down over time. So I suggest to people that for lawn mowing and gardening, one person on the tools should be able to bring in between $600 and $1,000 in a day. That's total revenue. If you've got more people, you've got employees, then obviously that changes. But if you're looking at that as a daily amount, that's a very easy figure for you to review on a daily
You can
basis.
manage it. Yep.
But it's important to also think about weekly, monthly, and annual amounts, because then you can annualize your losses over winter and start to look at what you actually need to make it through a whole year, given the fact that winter is slower than summer.
Yep. Absolutely.
So
So that's where, for example, having either when your financials are structured up front, making sure that you've got available money in the bank to cover that. The other really important one, Gary, and we haven't really touched on it yet, but a lot of businesses, particularly if you're registered for GST, that can be a really important thing to make sure you monitor, particularly for cash flow,
yes,
or making sure you've got the money. So anytime you get money in, if you've got a separate account, bank account, for example, for you might put as if you've got any surplus cash, put it into that. But more importantly, for your GST component, put it aside so you don't spend it.
yes.
All too often, I've seen businesses go down because have not accounted for that GST and putting that money away.
I did an interview last year with Katie from Profit First for Tradies. And I don't know if you've heard of Profit First, Peter, but it provides a framework for accounting and bookkeeping for small businesses that suggests you should have several bank accounts, and one of them is to put money aside for paying taxes. So it might be
Correct.
one just for
Yep.
GST and then another one for your other taxes, or a combined account that covers all of your expected taxes. And every time you get a dollar,
Absolutely.
you put a percentage in there.
Absolutely. So, yeah, and I mean, I started doing that fairly quickly once I got in. I was just literally 1/10. You get your invoice comes in, the payment comes in, put 1/10 away straight away.
Yeah.
So don't let it sit. You might sort that out. You get I mean, obviously, as you're going, you get a very good indicator as to how much you need to put away each month or for your quarterly payments if you're doing them that way.
Yeah.
But just making sure you do it don't sit on it and don't not do it, because you will get caught.
Yep.
And particularly where you least expect it, it's where it will come back to, I need to owe the tax man.
Yep.
And that's one person you don't want offside.
Yeah, he's not very forgiving if you say, "Oh, sorry, I don't have the money."
Exactly right.
I
And
found,
particularly where they know you're earning money, where they're going to say, well, where's it gone? What have you done with it?
yeah, I found it's really good to put aside money for personal tax at the same time. So once
Correct.
you've been in business for a year, they will start asking you to pay your personal tax quarterly in advance.
Yep.
So I put aside about 30% for covering personal
Personal
tax as well as
tax.
GST.
Yep.
And that way I've got a reasonable amount there that covers any foreseen taxes that come up. But I guess the next thing is you start looking at other routine expenses and putting money aside for insurance. And then if you get to the stage where you put on an employee, then you've got to start putting aside money for wages and their
Yep.
superannuation and all the expenses
Absolutely.
associated with that.
Absolutely. Well, I ended up with my business. I ended up making myself an employee of my business. So yeah, you're calculating your tax. You're paying it. You're paying your super. Now, of course, you're in your own business, you don't have to pay super. But at the end of the day, at some point, we're all going to get old.
Yeah.
So for any business owner, and for obviously for businesses, it is a tax deduction as such. So
Yes.
when you're making those super contributions.
So if you are looking at running a business and you haven't thought about making yourself an employee, you can choose to do those things manually. So make sure you're paying
Absolutely.
yourself regularly,
Yeah.
make sure you're putting money in super manually, all these things you can do, paying for income loss insurance, all those sorts of things. You can do it
Yep.
without making yourself an employee. If you make yourself an employee, it forces you to do it.
Oh, absolutely. And I think I forced myself to do it, or I got myself into a habit that's what I did. So, but
Yeah.
you're right. Particularly putting away, even if you don't do that, but you are covering. But again, at the end of the day, what's better? Doing it in bite-sized chunks, or when the tax man sends you the bill and he tells you you owe him 15 grand, and all of a sudden you haven't got it in the bank.
Yeah.
They're the sort of nasty shocks that no business likes. So definitely think about those sorts of things up front. They are critical.
Yeah, for sure. And if you haven't thought about it, you will find out.
Very quickly.
But
Very quickly.
if you find out the hard way, it often means you're going to have a debt to repay, and like we said, the tax man's not going to be very forgiving when it comes to that.
No,
Uh,
no, definitely not.
Likewise, you won't forgive yourself if you get to 55, 60 years of age and you're going, okay, what am I retiring on?
Yeah, exactly. And then again, you need to be very clear to yourself, why am I going into business for myself? A lot of people do it for lifestyle. I was very fortunate that when I went into the business, it did give me the flexibility that I didn't have with an employer.
Yes.
In our case, particularly, we had our my mother-in-law moved in with me. She had her health issues, but there were times, for example, where I could say, righto, I needed to set aside some time to support my wife in terms of helping her,
Yep.
but it didn't impact the business per se. If you were careful in how you planned that, or plan for those sorts of circumstances and what you want to achieve.
Yeah. And I think that's an important one because a lot of people will say they want to go into business because it's flexibility that it offers them. So they can choose to, and I did this. I stayed home to look after Zaria when she was young and spent part time working for myself. And then Cherie was going back to work part time. So that
Yep.
was beneficial starting up. But flexibility often means I'm taking a pay cut.
Oh yeah, and that's the things you need to understand that, and very much so. The other side of it, of course, is you need to also say, well, okay, if I'm going to go into business for myself, you don't want to go in and working 40, 50 hours a week, but you want to be very clear what is going to actually bring the money in for you,
Yeah.
and where are my priorities.
So there's a couple of misconceptions being in business, and we touched on one before that we both said two different numbers. I don't know if you caught that, but another misconception is going in thinking, okay, I'm going to work 20 hours a week or 30 hours a week instead of full time, and neglecting to realize that you're doing a lot of hours outside of the time you do offering this service. You're doing the follow up work, the booking, the quoting and the accounting and all those things that take up extra time. So
It's all the administration work.
You might be sitting at home, but if I'm sitting in my office trying to do book work, I'm likely to have some interruptions from a family member, and they don't really have a good understanding of the fact that I'm working, even though I'm not out there pushing a mower.
Yeah, and I suppose that's another very interesting point you're right there. Like I used to say, well, okay, I'd leave to go to work at, say, 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning. If you weren't on the road by then, basically don't bother, or you'd be sitting in traffic, and sitting in traffic doesn't pay the bills either. So very importantly, just having those differentiations with your family members, key understandings. I leave at X time. I'm home by 3:34, but I might have an hour. So really, I'm not available till 4:30.
Yeah.
But you still can make it work, particularly for family, which is a big one. We're both in that same boat.
Yes. Often we say, hey, I'm doing this for flexibility. But then when my wife says, hey, Gary, can you go up to Coles and get some groceries? It's like, no, I'm busy. Leave me alone. I'm not flexible.
Yeah, we're not that flexible, but yeah, but it does, like you can do things on the way home, pick stuff up, you can always say, hey, Cherie, what do I need to get on the way home? I'll be there in 5 minutes. So,
yes,
and there's all of that stuff too.
Frequently
That's
do
really
that.
important.
Yeah. So touching on the numbers that I mentioned, we said two different numbers earlier on, and I think this is important when analysing the feasibility of a business is actually understanding the difference in percentages. So I mentioned if
You
you haven't...
said 200, I said 150.
Yeah, that's the one.
So
After inviting Sortscape in to share how their software can help your business, we created a link for you to be able to support Aussie Lawn Stars when you join. Sortscape will save you time and effort with scheduling, quoting and reporting so you can build a more efficient business. Visit sortscape.com/lawnstars now to join, and thank you for your support.
I suppose the key thing really from where I was coming at it from is the key thing is, what do you want out of your business? What do you need to earn for you to be comfortable? Then, of course, you've got on top of that, you've got all the expenses of the business. So, obviously, any of the profits or for hopefully the listeners are realising what that entails. So it's your income less all your business expenses, both variable and fixed, to come to your net profit, and it's that net profit which is the money that you take home. Or the tax man will be looking at.
I tell people all the time, you need to understand the difference between drawing a wage and drawing profit from the business, because you've got to account for the labour that's involved, whether it's your labour or somebody else's, and that can be a wage.
Well, that's if you've got an employee. Yeah, that's right.
Even if you are the employee of the business, or you're the only person doing the work, if you are working 40 hours a week and you're not accounting for that as a wage, you make the mistake of what I did when I started the business. I thought, I'm awesome, I'm charging out at $50 an hour, and then all of a sudden I realized by the time I took expenses out of that, I was charging out at $25 an hour, and then I wasn't accounting for the unbillable hours. So by the time I added up the unbillable hours, I was working for about $10 to $12 an hour.
Yeah, which does make a big difference in the bottom line.
Yeah.
So I got to the point where I drew a wage, so it might have been $35 an hour.
Yeah.
But then I also knew that there would be still available bottom line after I'd paid wages, paid super, all the expenses, other expenses of business. There was still some money left over, which is what you really want to achieve if you can.
So if I understand correctly, when you work off a profit first business model, what you do is you analyze all of those costs. So the labor cost, the other expenses, and work out what you want to draw as a profit after all of those expenses are added up. And then you come to an amount. So if you go back to that position we said before, the 50% expense ratio, you go, okay, well, do I add 50% onto what I want to make, or do I take the total and divide it by 2 to work out what's mine versus what's expenses?
Yeah, and that is the other point too, because obviously you've got to pay the tax man out of that as well.
Yeah.
So even though there will be the net profit, the tax man will look at it and say, well, okay, if you, for example, if it's husband and wife, obviously you can split it.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, any profits you make, you've got to account for, anywhere from 35% will go to the tax man. So,
Yeah.
and then you've got what you want out of it after that. So that needs to be taken into account as well.
Now, feel free to pick holes in this theory. I've put this theory out there to people listening to my podcast for the last 3.5 years. When I started my business, I left a $50,000 a year income. So
Yep.
salary package was $50,000. I think it was 50 plus superannuation. And I figured if I could turn over $50,000 in my business, the expenses that I incurred working for somebody else, like driving to and from work, having a mobile phone, having work clothes, all those sorts of things, would be comparable to if I was running a business with expenses. Obviously, there's some holes in that, but I figured working for somebody else, I've got $4,000 or $5,000 in fuel expenses I needed to account for getting to and from work 5 days a week.
Yep.
And then work clothes that I had to buy for that job came out of the income after I paid tax and after I paid my fuel expenses and my mobile phone expenses. So I figured with a $50,000 income, I was living off about $32,000.
Yep. That would be
And that's
right.
working for somebody else. And I
The
figured,
other side of,
I
from a
figured
business perspective, that all changes.
Yeah. So I didn't allow for changes. I just figured that I could come up with a similar expense ratio running a business.
Yeah, not quite as easy as that. But look, in real terms, I mean, obviously, there is a point you've got to be careful with, because obviously the crossover between personal and business is an important aspect. But okay,
Very.
for example, the things you mentioned, you've got fuel going to and from work. All of a sudden, that becomes a business expense.
Yeah.
You've got your phone. 90% of it will most likely be relating to your business. So phoning clients, phoning suppliers, phoning any number of different people.
Yep.
All of a sudden, that becomes a business expense. So they can all be effectively charged or covered by your business.
Yes.
I mentioned to and from work, so there's your fuel.
Yep.
All your insurances that you had, which would have been a personal expense, all of a sudden can become a business expense.
Yes.
You can even go to a point now, Gary. Your office is at home, as an example.
Yeah.
So there'll be a percentage of your home expenses that can now become a business expense, and a
Well,
lot of people lose sight of that.
I don't just have an office at home. I've also got a workshop at home, and the shed is
Oh,
rather
there you
large
go.
and has a rather large power consumption. So,
Yep.
Yeah.
So you can claim all that. So the cost of your fuel, your gas, power,
Yep.
gas particularly for heating, if you want to keep that shed warm in winter. But there's all of those expenses that you can claim as part of your business costs, and they're legitimate business costs too.
And it's important to differentiate between legitimate business costs and making things up that the government could very
Oh,
easily
correct.
come back and
And there's
analyse.
clear rules on terms of what you can and can't do.
Yeah. Now, we probably shouldn't get into the weeds too much on some of those rules, but there are some
No, I'm not a tax accountant, so I'll stay away from that one.
Yeah, there are big differences between different business structures, and that's where we will say go back and talk to an accountant that does understand that.
Yep, absolutely. I was very lucky when I got into. Now, this was, I know you and I have just talked about this probably quite a number of times in the past.
Yeah.
For example, going in and working for yourself, you are the one that have to do, there's a fair amount of marketing, talking, walking the streets.
Yep.
etc. But your income, you've got to literally do a lot of hard work in terms of building your business up. Now,
Yes.
I bought into a franchise scenario. Yes, you've got all that hard work, but I suppose the one nice thing is, for example, I bought into a gym's franchise. The
Yeah.
gym's name sells itself fairly well.
Yes.
So that makes it, I'm not saying it makes it easy, but it makes it easier if you understand the difference.
For sure.
The one really big thing, and this is something that your listeners, particularly if they're looking at going into a franchise, make sure you ask the question, what are the franchise fees?
Yeah.
Now, the gyms group were really fortunate. That was a fixed cost each month.
Yeah.
So I knew exactly what I had to budget for. There are so many franchises out there where that fee is a variable percentage. So it might be
Yeah.
a percentage of your sales, as an example,
Yep.
which is, if you sell 10,000 and you had to pay 40% to the franchisor, that's a big hit. Whereas
Yes.
in the gyms group, for example, it was a fixed cost. So I knew exactly what that was each month.
Yeah.
The more I went out and did, but it didn't mean that those franchise costs increased. So that was a real bonus for me.
Yeah. So I think there are different models there, and
Absolutely.
if you pay variable rate, you would hope that that puts you in front for most of your business decisions.
And that's where you need to make really, really clear decisions on, particularly up front. Is that model going to work for you?
Yeah.
If it is a percentage of sales, yes, your income goes up, but at the same time, those expenses come up, but it's still a percentage that you're getting. And of course, that gap, the bigger the income, that gap becomes more as far as the actual dollar value.
Now, with gyms, and I don't know if test and tag is different to mowing, but the mowing division, I think your franchise fees are on average around $800 a month. I know there are some variables that will affect
Well,
different
like you've
people
got
differently.
lead fees and things like that.
Well, that's what I was going to
Um,
say. The lead
yeah,
fees are on top of that.
yep.
So
But even then, if you know, for example, like the mowing lead fee might only be $10, it was $42 for the test and tag one, but your
yeah,
average sale was a lot higher.
yeah,
So, like the average sale for a test and tag job, for example, might have been somewhere between $500 and $1,000,
yeah,
whereas your mowing might only be $200,
yes.
but your lead fee was fairly small.
Yeah. So the mowing jobs will vary between, I think most people sort of draw a minimum of around $80 for a mowing job nowadays. But
Yep.
then they can range all the way up to several $1,000s quite easily.
Yep.
So yeah, it is an interesting one. But that lead fee in gyms, if I understand correctly, is mostly a way of encouraging franchisees to take the leads seriously and not just take leads without a
Oh,
care as to
absolutely.
whether they get them.
Yep. Yeah, because obviously every lead you get, unless you can convert it into a job, that's money that's costing your business. So yeah, you do get to that. And I mentioned right up front being able to close the sale. So you've got to ask the customer, look, you're happy with that quote? When would you like me to do the job?
Yeah.
Or you're happy for that job to be done? When can we book it in? But actually convert the job. And I think a lot of and this is where they give you some, or if certainly get the training to go out. How do you actually approach customers? And there's plenty of great courses out there that can teach you some of those sales techniques.
Yeah, and if you come in without that, often you will self-sabotage when it comes to closing on a sale.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You can be the loveliest guy on the world, but unless you can say, hey, Gary, you're happy for me to proceed with that job, you're happy with the quote,
Yeah,
you say, yes, right, when can I book it in?
yeah.
You just got to actually ask the question.
And gyms training days, I think they do a week training now. When you start as a new franchisee, you go to their
Yeah.
headquarters and you do a week with them. They put a lot of emphasis on dealing with those various issues.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And even if you're going out on your own, particularly if you haven't had a lot of exposure to, um, I'll say retail, but actually getting out and working with people and asking for the business, quoting or etc. have a look for that sort of course that's out there, and there's plenty of them out there.
Yep.
That can give you that sort of exposure, help you to understand, how to convert those leads into, or those quotes, for example, into actual work.
Now, I know when we look at the lawn mowing division with gyms, I think they take somewhere around 10% of the market just for the gyms network alone.
Yep.
So for every 100 jobs out there, gyms is probably doing 10 of them, which means there's a lot of people that are either independent or they've gone with another franchise.
Yep.
But more of them would be independent than anything else.
Absolutely.
And I think this raises the question, is it beneficial to be in a franchise, or are you better off going out alone? And there are pros and cons both ways.
Yeah, I would agree. And I mean, you've done it on your own, Gary. So, I mean, as well. But it's again, knowing your market that you want to get into, where are you going to get your jobs, how are you going to get your jobs, more to the point.
Yeah.
And it might mean that you have to go out and letterbox or physically make phone calls. There can be any number of different ways that you can advertise for that.
Yeah, I would say that the number one benefit of joining up with a franchise, particularly gyms, because it's the most prolific franchise model in Australia, is
Absolutely.
they give you systems so you don't have to
Yes,
learn
correct.
everything. You're not guessing on all those things. You have a system in
No.
place already that helps you to know whether it's succeeding or not.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And I suppose that's one of the key reasons why they get the successes that they do.
Yeah.
And you look at it, you turn around, don't blink, because there'll be another Jim's franchise and something completely different opening up that may appeal to some of the listeners out there. But again, there's certainly many, many different types of roles in business. But I suppose the key thing is, what are you passionate about? What is it that drives you to want to be in that business? That's probably a really big question to ask yourself and your family.
Yeah. I think the biggest issue I see, and I've struggled with this myself, so I don't mind throwing myself under the bus with this, when somebody starts a small business with an idea of lawn mowing or test and tag or whatever it is, they don't have a vision for the scope of that business and they don't
Correct.
have a business plan in place, which
Yep.
means invariably they will get busy. Even if they don't know how to market and close sales, they'll get busy and start thinking about whether they should put on an employee. And
Yep.
I've done this. I've started initially put on an employee going, oh, I'm really busy, but I'm making less money when I've got an employee than when I didn't have an employee.
Yeah.
And that's
Yep.
just the first issue dealing with employees. There's a whole bunch of things. If you think you're buying flexibility by running your own business and then you go, okay, I want to grow the business, all of a sudden you got to deal with a whole heap of management issues that takes away from your flexibility. But also, if you haven't planned with a business plan, no vision as to whether those things are going to be profitable.
Yeah, and that's actually a really interesting point, Gary. We were very fortunate. For example, even though my business grew, probably doubled in size over the time,
Yeah.
I had quite a different range of clients, but we also had other people that we could call in if we needed to, particularly for the really big jobs.
Yeah.
And you might come up with an agreement with a colleague where you can, you still keep a bit for yourself.
Yes.
You're still making what you want out of it,
Yep.
but you don't have all the employee costs. So there, sometimes by subcontracting to other people to maybe another way of supporting your business without putting an employee on, particularly if you don't need it all the time.
Yeah. And I think that when people are doing lawn mowing and gardening, and then they get asked to quote something that isn't lawn mowing and gardening, they will often consider subcontracting. But
Yep.
if people are getting asked to just do more lawns and more gardens, or a bigger lawn and a bigger garden, and I've had this situation. I got asked to take on a fairly large job fairly early on. I looked at the maths and I thought, it's going to take me away from the jobs I'm currently doing. So I either need to put an employee on, or I need to be able to get rid of some of the existing work, but the maths didn't make it viable because they wanted to get it at a bargain rate, which meant that I'd actually be taking a lower rate
Absolutely. Yeah.
for more work, but it didn't make
It
sense.
wasn't paying as much.
Yeah.
No, and that's always going to be what you have to weigh up. And I think that is actually a really good point, Gary, because it also means you need to know what your bottom line is, particularly if you are doing the bigger jobs. And you're absolutely right. Some of those really big jobs, they say, "Oh no, but we only want to do it for X amount," and all of a sudden you're kissing goodbye to half your income. But it's really not getting you anywhere. You need to know what your bottom line is.
I'm Gary Ashton, and I'm here to help business owners succeed and enjoy being in business. Does running your business feel chaotic? Maybe you started it for freedom, to live the life you wanted, but now you're stuck in the grind, overwhelmed and exhausted. The stress doesn't stop. You work harder, but nothing really changes. Get real support at Think Tank Coaching. Get crystal clear on future goals, your ideal customers, and the numbers to focus on that will move your business forward. If you're ready to make a change, let's talk. Book your free strategy session now at thinktankcoaching.com.au. Yeah. So when I mentioned earlier in this interview, I said between $600 and $1,000 a day per person is what a lot of people will be aiming for with lawn mowing and gardening.
Yep,
Some people will go much higher than that, but that's a
absolutely.
ballpark. If you look at some of the bigger businesses in this space, they will put an employee or 5 employees out there on a big job so that they can get it knocked over fairly quickly, and they will quote on the basis of about $450 to $500 per person on the job for a day. And they can do that because they're a really large business. But it's not feasible for a small business to compete when you say, well, the bare minimum I need is $600 for a day and I really want $800.
That's right. Yeah, it's absolutely critical. Absolutely critical. And that's where, if you're doing quoting and if somebody, if your client is continually trying to undercut you and say, "Hey, no, I need it lower than that. I need it lower than that," but at some point you can't say yes to everything. It is important to know your bottom line. Okay, I can come down so far. I can still achieve my, $800 or $1,000 a day. But at the end of the day, if he comes in and he's crimping you to say 600, is that a sacrifice you're happy to make? And if not, you need to say no to the job.
Exactly.
You need to learn how to say no. Sometimes that can be really important too.
Yes. And sometimes saying no means that the client will then come up to your asking price, and sometimes it means they'll go and find somebody else.
Yep. And they might find somebody else, but at the end of the day, will they, will the person who does that job be happy to continue doing it, particularly if it's been undercut? You can only do that for so long, and you'll find a lot of those. A really interesting one. I'll come back to a story, which is, if I may, just for a second on that. I had a competitor came into one of my really good customers. I was wasn't overcharging them, but at the same time, I was covering my customer with more than just one type of service.
Yeah.
So, for example, I might have been, let's say, fire first aid, test and tag. So I was covering a range of services that client needed.
Yep.
They had somebody come in and offered I can do the job at $1.95, as an example, whereas I might have been charging $4.
Yep.
And I said to the client, well, okay, you might be able to do that, but are you getting the service? Is it the service that you want? Will they come back and offer that repeat service again? Most likely not. Will they be there in 12 months' time? I would say definitely not.
Yep.
So undercutting a job doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to keep that client long term, or B, whether you are going to survive in the job.
One of the things I see in my industry there, Peter, is that a lot of people will see that as a red flag and they will just cut their losses and say, I'm not going to talk to that client again, because that client becomes the red flag rather than the issue.
Yep, correct.
And I think there's value in both there, because if you label the client as a red flag because they are looking for the cheapest price, then when they learn the lesson that the cheaper person wasn't good value for them, they might want to come back to you, and you've written them off
Oh,
and
you
said
never
no.
completely shut, and you're dead right. You never completely slam the door. Ironically, I had another very interesting example. It was an aged care client, and they were just trying to undercut.
Yeah,
I was always there. I always did the job. We did it well. Always added value, and the
yeah,
value to me didn't cost me much, but it cost something to the client.
yep,
Um, they got somebody came in completely undercut. I said, look, I'm sorry, I can't do it for that. If you want to do it for that, we'll just have to say goodbye for now.
yeah,
6 months later, they were back.
yeah.
And I never lost them again because they knew that they could rely on the service that they were getting. And that's really important for your clients.
So there's two things that come in there with this, and because you were in test and tag, a customer is going to be valued differently to a lawn mowing customer. So that's the first
Sure,
thing.
absolutely. But the
A lot of
principles are similar.
people in lawn care and gardening will be looking at a customer that's valued around $1,500 to $2,000 a year.
Yep,
And if that's a residential lawn mowing customer, it's fairly easy to replace them with a new customer and say they're a red flag.
absolutely.
See you later. Never take them back again. And if they call back, sorry, I'm busy. I won't talk to you.
Yep, and don't
Um,
compromise. I think that's a very good point you make.
the
Um, if
the
they
other,
are a red flag,
yeah, sorry. The other
don't
side
keep
of
going.
that I see is if you have good customer service skills, then your transparency will help you to maintain a good relationship with people, regardless of whether they come and go. And
Correct.
whether you want to take them back on or not, that puts you in a position of power rather than putting you in a position of loss. So if you're willing to
So,
actually talk to people about that, then it makes
yep,
that clarification as to what you're charging for. The words that we hear in this industry, and you probably would have heard this too, is, oh, the last guy. The last guy this, the last guy that. And
yeah,
it's usually a negative thing about the last guy, which is why they come to you.
yep. And don't always think the last guy was the best guy because probably most likely they're not, and it's a repeat offender if you like.
Definitely.
So yeah, I can actually remember one other story because there was a client that I had repeat business with. And because I had a range of services that I did with that client. This is a different one again. They actually said, look, they were approached by another business, and my client said, no, not interested.
Yeah.
I pay more, yes, but I said, I know my guy's going to turn up.
Yep.
So never be afraid to add value to what you deliver. Doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah.
And even it might be something really inconsequential, but again, to your client, that's a big deal.
In lawn care and gardening, you are going to have a better reputation than the last guy if you just turn up when you say you turn up. That's the
Yep.
number one thing, is just being reliable. And then
Oh,
obviously,
absolutely. And that's in any job.
yeah, but it seems it's a really difficult thing to find when it comes to trades.
Yeah, yeah.
So
And I think you made a really, really good point there, Gary, in that it is to a client reliability, and they don't mind paying a little bit more for the fact that you will be reliable and deliver a good job.
yeah, I think that's where transparency around your pricing is going to come up time and time again, because customers will
Yep.
question if they see you on a job and they start going, oh, how long was he here? How much am I paying him for 15 minutes or half an hour? They will
Yep.
start questioning
Yep.
your pricing. And if you're transparent on your pricing and you're willing to have a discussion with your clients around pricing, then they will most likely learn to appreciate why you charge at a particular rate. But
Oh,
if
absolutely.
a lot of
Yeah.
small businesses And I've heard a lot of business coaches say, don't give people rates, give them fixed quotes, fixed job prices only. And I look at that and I go, okay, on a residential job, I can understand why that shuts down a discussion that is not necessary. But at every level, customers paying for a service will start looking at a rate. Even if you don't give them the rate, they will start making it up in their head, and they will come to the conclusion that they're paying you
Absolutely.
a lot more than what they get paid.
Correct. Yeah, correct. So, but it is important to have those honest discussions with your client, and particularly don't hide anything, in terms of what you're doing, why you're doing it, the cost to do it. All those discussions are very important discussions.
Yeah. I think the bigger your client, the more likely it is they're going to be well aware of what your hourly rates are,
Yep.
and the more they're going to want to discuss it. But even the smallest of clients are still going to start analysing it at one stage or another.
Yeah. Yeah. Couldn't
And
agree more.
I
Couldn't
think
agree more.
if you can say to a client, "Hey, I'm working on $100 an hour," and there's huge variables there. It's not a closed case to say $100 an hour. If you can say to the client, "Hey, out of that $100 an hour, I pay myself $40, $35," that's what I actually claim as an income. It starts to put it into perspective for them that you've got expenses that are not just wages.
Absolutely. And I think that's where, again, you need to be honest with yourself. You've mentioned it a couple of times. You know what your benchmark you want to achieve on a day-to-day basis. How are you going to arrive at that? How many jobs do you need to do in the day? Am I doing a bigger job, which means that I might only do one big job for the day, but how do I fit in my other smaller clients?
Yep.
So, planning all that becomes critical as well.
Efficiency is the thing that rules a business and the decisions you make as a small business owner. Right Mowers give you the options in their product lineup to match efficiency with size, fuel usage, and the type of jobs you want to target, from catching to mulching or side discharge, from roadside verges to acreages, and manicured lawns to 6 feet tall and super long. I've been using the Right Stander I 42-inch with a Catch Pro for manicured areas and the Stander ZK61 to maximise productivity for large open acreage mowing. If you need to replace your push mower, try the 32-inch Stander B. If you have more open access to residential properties, there's a 42 through 48-inch option that suits you. And if you want to enter the acreage market, the 52, 61 and 72-inch machines have choices in engine size and model type to suit the work you want it to do. Right Standards go the distance, saving you time and money season after season. Yeah. One of the mistakes I've seen come up there in relation to that hourly rate is that clients start to think that if you're charging, say, $100 an hour, then if you've got another employee, that must be included in that $100 an hour instead of factoring in that it's $100 per hour per person. And that can lead to some very angry clients when they realize that they're paying you not $100 but $200 or $300 an hour because you've got multiple staff on the job.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can be very thankful I didn't have to. It wasn't in that scenario, but again, particularly where I had bigger jobs, I brought in other franchisees. It didn't change the price, but it did change how it was structured.
Yes.
Like we knew we had so many items we had to get through, but that was divided up literally between 2, 3, 4 guys.
Yeah.
But you still achieve what you wanted out of it on that basis. And that was always the way that I costed those jobs.
And when you've got a customer that appreciates that, and I've had this situation where a customer has said, "Hey, we need you to bring in more than just yourself, knock this work over quickly." And you're like, okay, instead of $800 for a day, we're charging $3,000 for the day.
Absolutely.
The customer doesn't bat an eyelid if they appreciate that you've got 5 people on the
Correct.
job.
Yeah, and that's a big thing. That is absolutely a big thing.
But I hear this from business owners as well as from clients on the regular that they haven't actually done the maths about what the hourly rate is per person. They've just factored in
Yeah.
thinking, oh, that's a big hourly rate. It must be for 2 or 3 staff.
Yeah, no, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, but anyway, it is certainly an interesting discussion when it comes to that. How do we achieve it? How do we keep it? How do we get our bottom lines right? How do I feed my family? There's all of that comes into play.
Yeah, for sure. It's a lot of factors when it comes to running a business in terms of actually knowing what your bottom line is, what your revenue is, and the difference in between.
And probably just on that, we mentioned up front having a good accounting package, and a lot of them are fairly easy now,
Yes.
where you can, and obviously scanning all your receipts, having all the receipts in your accounting software, a lot of it can do it now.
Yep.
But just taking that time to sit down and work through it, understand what is happening each month, when
Yep.
you go back and review what's happened for the month, that can be really important just to find those little things where you can improve on how you run your business.
Yeah, I've set up Zero so that the dashboard has some widgets there, and it gives me some of
Yes.
those week by week, moment by moment, month by month costs of
Yep.
doing business.
Yep.
So the ones that I've found really relevant for me are the difference between equipment fuel and vehicle fuel, because I can claim the fuel excise off the fuel that goes in my equipment.
Yep.
But then other things like wages are really good to keep an eye on as well, so that I can, okay, I know what my monthly expenses are up to with those things.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And then,
So that's where I think it is absolutely imperative. And look, if you're, yeah, you mentioned, look, you might have got into doing, let's say, got into lawn mowing, but you like the technical side of the job, but you hate the bookkeeping side.
yeah,
Certainly have somebody you can get very good bookkeepers to do the job, do that aspect of the job, but
yes.
make sure you've got a good working relationship with that person. Yes, it's a cost to your business, but at the same time, you don't want your business to fail because you haven't got the expertise in that particular area. But definitely take the time to find those good people to support your business.
One of the people I interviewed going back a couple of years now, he's in West Australia, Brendan Winterbourne. He runs a business with, I think he was about 150 employees.
Oh, wow.
And his comment that really struck me was most people growing a business from being solo to having employees won't get past about 6 to 10 employees. And the reason being is because your profit margin gets stolen as you
Correct.
put on
Yep.
management. So if you're solo, you are the
You're
CEO,
it.
the CFO, the bookkeeper,
The
everything in the
worker.
business.
Yep.
But
Correct.
as you grow and pointing to what you were saying, you put on a bookkeeper to do some work for you. That does cost you money, but it also frees you up to focus on the things that
To do
you're
more
better at.
work. Absolutely.
But if you're solo and you're running off a fairly good profit margin, you might be hitting around 30% profit after all expenses, including wages. As you grow and you become the size of Microsoft or Apple, if you can hit 10% profit, you're doing really well.
Yeah, and they're all key things. But again, when you get to that point of growing, volume is everything as well.
Yes.
So you may still grow. You're still looking at it. Well, what am I looking? What am I wanting to get out of the business? Even if you grow, you might find your profit margin drops, but you're still achieving what you want out of it. Then that can still make it worthwhile to grow. But I think the one little fact that it has to be really, really careful of as a business grows, it will suck up more cash.
Yeah.
And unless you are making, the persons that are out doing the actual legwork, you need to make sure that the cash is still coming in, the jobs are happening, that they're not just sitting on the side of the road.
Yeah.
You need to make sure they are actually doing something. So there's all of those sorts of things that need to be taken into account, and
Yeah.
just being really careful that growing too fast can be detrimental,
Yep.
Growing not fast enough can also be detrimental. So it's finding that fine balance as to when do you put on that person, have I got enough business to support two people?
Yeah.
That can be also really challenging question to, or however many employees you end up with.
I would guess the majority of people starting a small service business, regardless, and lawn mowing and gardening are going to be more so, but the majority of people are going to be happier if they don't have staff and they're just
Yep.
self-employed, which means they literally bought themselves a job. And there's a small group of people that might have a banking background or a business background that are thinking about how can I grow my business with staff? How can I get through those stages of growth
Yeah,
without too
absolutely.
much bloat? Because all
Yeah,
those things you mentioned
absolutely.
become bloat if you have staff that are not doing their work and they're still getting paid.
Yeah, well, then
yeah,
that's where your management, your human resource aspects become very important too.
yeah,
Reviewing the performance of any employee is a crucial part of making sure that the business will survive because they're representing you.
yep.
So yeah, that is really, really, really important.
So yeah, once you get to the stage of putting on your first employee, you have to start dealing with those issues. And the more
Correct.
employees you have, the more issues come up. So if
Yeah.
you've got an offsider that just sits there doing the same work you're doing, you can manage their every move. But if you send somebody out to do a job while you're not supervising them, have they got a supervisor or are they the supervisor? And how do you know you trust that they're doing the right thing?
Well, the other thing is you have to trust that person too. So there's got to be that level of trust built up, whether it be over time. You know, you're seeking feedback from your clients as to how that person has gone. Have they done the job to expectations? You know, there's all of that that comes into it as well. And that's supervise. You can supervise without being there,
Yes.
but it's how you do that becomes quite critical.
Yeah, and that's why a lot of people starting a small service business simply will not want, or they'll grow and then shrink. Like I've done numerous times. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, put on employees. Oh, that's stressful. I don't want to deal with
Yeah,
it.
exactly right. Exactly right. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I think there's a lot of things we've covered, Peter. Are there any topics that we should touch on that you can think of?
Uh, um, I was probably even just to come back to summarise.
Yeah, sure.
Number one, have a business plan, but also realise you may do the business plan up front, but that business plan doesn't have to be, oh, I've done a business plan. Yep, that's great. Chuck it in the drawer and you never use it again.
Yeah,
A business plan, a good one, is one that will keep evolving, growing, changing, cutting, adding. You know, it's something it really needs to be for a good business. You look at any of the really good businesses out there, that's exactly what they are doing. They're
yeah,
constantly reviewing the model when they originally conceived the idea or went into that business.
yeah,
They're constantly reviewing it. That's number one. Number two would be to make sure you have some good support people behind you. Um, Having a good tax accountant. You know, I think we both understand that one only too well.
yes,
And it shouldn't necessarily be, oh, look, tax time, I'll just take a box full of stuff in, dump it on my accountant's desk and say, there you go, get me a major tax refund. Yeah, that's not going to happen.
yeah,
But
exactly.
because your accountant is also a very good person who can give you sound advice that can be helpful, particularly when you're looking at how do you structure the financials for your business.
Yep,
How do you know whether you want an overdraft? How do you know, well, look, okay, I'm going to get a bigger loan up front. I'm going to put money aside. You know, there's all of that sort of stuff.
yes,
Setting up the correct number of counts. You know, we mentioned up front making sure that you put away for your personal tax, your GST. If you've got employees, putting away the PAYG.
yep,
That's all critical. And then it gives you a far better picture of what your actual cash that you have, what are you going to get out of it? I
Yeah.
suppose the number one really big important factor in any business, A, why did you go into it in the first place? Doesn't matter whether it's lawn mowing,
Yep.
being a pilot, you might be a contract pilot, you might do test and tag, you do bookkeeping.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. Why do I go into this and what do I want to get? What are my objectives that I want to achieve out of this business? They're all critical aspects. Um, I think if you're doing that, you understand those key things really, really well, and you have those support factors behind you.
Yeah.
They can be absolutely crucial in terms of am I here? Look, I've seen guys come into, for example, even into franchises where they've had all the support behind them. They've had other guys that they can reach out to, talk to, but they never structured it properly in the first place. They didn't have a good understanding of what they were walking into, and they failed in 6 months.
Yeah.
And we have to remember that a lot of small businesses, there's a large majority that don't succeed, but there are a heck of a lot that do.
Yep.
So I think having at least those 5 initial things that I mentioned is really key in
For sure.
terms of, am I going to be here for the long haul? Like 10 years before I decided, and it was only by pure fluke that I ended up doing a change and sold my business, and I sold a good business.
Yep. That's it.
So, you're building value and it's an asset to you in terms of how, the satisfaction you get out of doing it well, dealing with the clients. You can then develop some really good friendships with clients.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm sure you've had that too.
Yep.
So,
Definitely.
yeah. So they're just some key things, just from my point of view,
Yep.
that are really, really critical in terms of being able to have a successful small business, and then just making sure you work at it and keep developing it.
Yeah, so I think that's a really good summary of that. And one of the key points I like to remind people of all the time is a dollar amount that they can look at and reasonably expect to make in a business
Absolutely.
that is lawn care and gardening. So I refer back to that $600 to $1,000 a day, and that gives people a range of sort of $120,000 to $200,000 a year. That is fairly comfortable for people to pull in
Yep.
with a
Yep.
minimal expense ratio.
Correct. Yeah,
So
and that was very much the way my business was. Probably very similar. I was looking around about $1,000 a day. Yeah,
yeah,
I needed to make that. That was my objective,
yep,
and and because you've broken it down into bite-sized pieces, it makes it very easy. Okay, I know how to achieve that. I know I need to get so many jobs a day in order to make that happen, and that's key.
yeah. I've used really simple numbers for people previously and said, look, $120,000 a year, if you aim for that as turnover, that's $10,000 a month. That's 2.5 grand a week,
Yep, yep,
$500
yep.
a day. Aim higher than that,
Exactly.
though.
Yeah, and it's not hard to achieve.
Yeah,
It's not hard to achieve, and you're dead right. But breaking it down, putting it into bite-sized chunks that you can understand and get your head around, instead of looking at big numbers. Big numbers will scare the daylights out of you, whereas bite-sized chunks won't.
well, if people take a simple number like that, and I would say you could easily double that and still achieve the targets, but it gives
Yep,
you ratios that you can then
it's your
compare over
target.
time, and you can go, okay,
Yep,
am I hitting my hourly target? Am I hitting my daily target? Am I hitting my monthly target? Am I on track? If I've got an annual target, am I on track to be able to manage having a light winter?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the other side is, lawn mowing particularly, you do have downtime.
Yes,
Grass doesn't grow all the time. When it starts getting cold or the rain stops,
that's right.
people don't want their lawns mowed. They don't want you mowing dirt, for
That's it.
example.
Yeah,
So, yeah, you need to cover for those times. So it might be like you looking for a target of $500 a day, but that's over the whole year.
yeah,
But you might only be working full time, if you like, for 8 months of the year, as an example.
that's it. Yeah. So
So
I,
all of that comes important.
I think across Australia, there's some very interesting differences in seasons, but it seems universal nonetheless that there's about 7 months out of the year, which is the growth season, and 5 months out of the year that is somewhat dormant. And so, yeah, if people look at those numbers and they go, oh, I need to aim for $500 a day average, but that means I need to aim for $600 a day in order to be able to hit that
Yep.
average when I have
Yep.
down days, or jump up a bit higher than that, because I do recommend jumping up higher than that. But yeah,
See, the other side, I suppose, is then if you know you're going to have lean times, what are you going to do in those lean times?
Yep.
Is there something that you can develop that will still very much complement the client base that you have? You know, it might be, well, okay, we're doing mowing, but what about all the garden care, for example? You know, is all of that, can some of that supplement some of that where you're not getting the growing?
And I think in my industry, you can very easily take your existing customers that ask for extra jobs and say, hey, once we get to May, I'll come back and do those extra jobs for you, whether it's
Yep.
a garden clean up, a gutter clean out,
Yep.
or an overgrown
Exactly.
job
That's
someone
it.
might have. Yeah.
So you're adding value to your clients. And that is a really crucial one. And I think that's a very, very good point.
Yep. But
Very
I
good point.
also find the inverse of that is true. If you have larger commercial work, then often you can push that out to a flat rate all year round, because you can just go, okay, we'll charge a flat rate, but we will do different work at different times of the year.
Yeah. Yeah. It's how you manage that. You can be innovative in how you do that too.
Well, larger commercial contracts often appreciate having a flat rate rather than having a peak and a trough of their expenses too, because they want their cash flow to be easier to manage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are ways you can make it certainly work for you a lot better, that's for sure.
That's it. Well, Peter, I want to say thanks for your time. It was
No, thank you.
good to get you in for a formal interview and not just catching up with you as friends.
Yep. No, thank you, Gary. I appreciate it. And I hope, well, like I always say, if somebody can get something out of it, then the time's been well worthwhile.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your expertise in this field. It's been good to draw on your knowledge.
Thank you for listening to Aussie Lawn Stars. Please remember to rate and review the show on the Apple Podcasts app or the player you use. Exciting new shows are released every Monday. Make sure you follow or subscribe to hear the next episode.